6:35 a.m. Members have the minutes from February 24th in their packets. Are there any corrections or additions? Seeing none, the minutes stand approved as presented, and there is a quorum present. The first item on the agenda for today is the Minnesota Department of Agriculture's presentation on the beginning farmer tax credit. Welcome to the committee. Commissioner, if you would identify yourself for the record.
Madam Chair, members, my name is Tom Peterson, and I serve as the Commissioner for the Minnesota Department of Agriculture. Appreciate the opportunity to visit with you today about the beginning farmer tax credit, and I appreciate that you're taking time to hear more about this important issue. I personally have worked on this credit for many, many years, starting with Senator Coonan, who had early versions of the credit, and then worked closely with Senator Goggin in 2017 when this passed, and then as commissioner starting in 2019, continuing to implement this program. It has been, I just kind of want to remind too why we worked on the credit in the first place, as we saw the average age of the farmer continue to creep up every 2 years. It would 55, 57, 59, and knowing that the University of Minnesota Extension will say that 50% of all the farmland is going to change hands in the next 20 years. And over 50% of the farmland currently is not farmed by the person who owns the land. I also want to point out that in my travels as commissioner that this is a nation-leading tax credit. When I go to my national meetings and meet with our other commissioners, this is something that they'd like to put in their other state, and that is actually happening, where other states are modeling their credit after our credit. And as you'll see in a minute, our biggest concern is just the need of this credit, as we see a lot of people accessing this credit, and they really appreciate it. It's been very, to me, successful. I remember the original fiscal note I thought said we'd have 400 transactions a year, where we many times are well over 1,000. With that, I want to turn it over to Mrs. Heck to walk through the slides.
Welcome to the committee. If you'd identify yourself for the record, and then you may proceed.
Good morning. My name is Jenny Heck, and I am the program administrator for the Beginning Farmer Tax Credit at the MDA. I work in a subdivision called the RFA, which you will also see on my slides, the Rural Finance Authority that manages this program. So the Beginning Farmer Tax Credit is a non-refundable state tax credit for landlords and sellers, who we call asset owners, who work with beginning farmers, and that is anyone who has entered into farming in the last 10 years. Eligible assets they can use for this program are most commonly farmland, but they can also use it for selling and renting livestock, equipment, buildings, and machinery that are used for agriculture. This, as Commissioner Peterson mentioned, funding is limited, and we approve these tax credits first come, first served, with applications opening in January each year. And again, this is part of our goal to support farmland access. Minnesota is very much a leader. As the Commissioner mentioned, we're one of 7 states to have a program like this. We're the 3rd state and the first to allow it for sales as well as leases. Everyone since has followed using it for sales as well. Some eligibility things. To be eligible, the beginning farmer needs to be a Minnesota resident, an individual. They need to be farming in Minnesota. We have a net worth limit of $1,042,000 that's indexed for inflation every year. They need to be doing the majority of farm labor and management, and then they also need to be enrolled in or already completed a farm business management program. We do offer them a small tax credit to reimburse them for any expenses for that farm business management class that we require them to take. For the asset owner, unlike the beginning farmer, they could be a business entity or an individual, although they cannot be an equipment dealer. And they can continue to claim this tax credit as long as they are working with an eligible beginning farmer. And then as far as family, any extended family can use this tax credit for sales and leases, but only direct family members, so that's parents, grandparents, other kind of lineal family members can use the tax credit only for land sales. So here's a summary of, all those tax credits. In a given year, the asset owner can claim either a tax credit for a rental or a sale for each beginning farmer they work with. For your basic cash lease, that's 10% of the rental income with a maximum of $7,000. For a share rent lease, that would be 15% of the rental income, a higher maximum of $10,000. And then for those sales, it's either 8 or 12% of the sale price, and the maximum tax credit is $50,000. And then lastly on the chart is that tax credit that goes to the beginning farmer. We will reimburse them for any farm business management tuition paid out of pocket, up to $1,500, and we'll do that for 3 years. We only require them to take the class 3 years, so we'll reimburse them for those 3 years. And then a note on
excuse me, Ms. Heck.
sales. Please.
On the slide of asset owner eligibility, why was the policy not to allow an equipment dealer, et cetera, to be involved? What was the, not objecting to it, obviously, but just want to thoroughly understand why there was one set of people in agribusiness who were not able to be the asset owner in this case.
Madam Chair,
Commissioner.
and members, my understanding and recollection is that in working with a lot of the different groups that basically we were trying to go farmer to farmer or farmer to, and so, it's something maybe we could talk about someday or something, but, and a lot of this started really with land transfers, and then equipment was always kind of part of it too. So that would make sense, but that's my recollection and understanding of kind of the intent of it was to kind of really help a farmer. And then when you see like Trust LLC, those are things that a farmer landowner is allowed in Minnesota to set up. And so that was kind of my understanding.
Commissioner, I was also trying to recall if it wasn't kind of a hedge against corporate farming. And when you start to bring in these other entities, you're moving extremely close to corporate farming, which of course is illegal in Minnesota, and farther away from farmer to farmer. So I actually raised the question because I wanted the answer to be stated rather than not knowing the answer. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
You may continue.
Thank you. So continuing with the sales, the tax credit for the sales, as I mentioned, it's either 8 or 12% of the sale price. Any eligible beginning farmer would be getting that 8%, or their asset owner rather, would be getting that 8%. If the beginning farmer is also considered a limited land access farmer, then their asset owner would get the 12% rate. A limited land access farmer must meet all of the following to be considered that. So 1, they do not own any farmland currently. They do not rent from any relative. And 3, they don't have any long-term leases, which would be something more than 3 years. So moving into funding, as we've mentioned, funding is limited, which really limits program efficacy. I hear from farmers just about every day on the phone talking about how challenging this can be with limited funding. Last year, we ran out of funds in about 3 weeks, and this year we ran out of funds in 3 days. So if you are not able to get your lease together in that amount of time, or your sale together, or if your seller is not willing to wait until next January to put all this together, it's very hard for you to access these funds right now. We do, however, have $4 million annually, and that is scheduled to sunset in 2030. Some things that, legislation that has.
Excuse me.
Please.
Ms. Heck, is the sunset come after a period of 8 years? We sometimes don't sunset things, but otherwise, when we are doing it, we generally are limiting a period of effectiveness to 8 years. And so I was just wondering if did this credit begin another period of an 8-year period in like 2022? Do you,
I'm not sure, because it was 2018 it was passed.
just, I'm going to ask Ms. Pollack. Ms. Pollack?
Madam Chair and members, as this is indicated in the materials provided by the agency, but my recollection is that the credit was scheduled to sunset after tax year 2022,
Yes.
and then in 2023, we extended it another 8 years through
Okay.
tax year 2030.
Thank you. Ms. Heck?
Thank you. So other recent legislative changes, these all, I believe, came in 2023, and have affected the funding for this program. So we opened the program up to direct family, which was very intentional and able to help with those land transitions in the family. But we also increased the maximum amount for sales, which was previously $32,000 to now it's $50,000. That year, we also eliminated our ability to have rollover funding, and then also reduced the total program budget by about 40%. It was at $6.5 million, and now it's down to $4 million. So all of those things combined have resulted in this shortfall that we've had the past couple years. And the next chart shows that in a bit more detail. The program began in 2018, and you'll see now for the 3rd year in a row, our application requests have exceeded the available funding. In 2025, we denied 585 applications, and that was about half last year. It's about 40% that we had to deny due to limited funding. So that is all I have for my presentation, but I would be happy to answer any questions. Thank you all.
Senator Putnam.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Madam Chair, for giving us an opportunity to revisit the beginning farmers tax credit, and also for all your support of Minnesota agriculture over the past couple of years. As many of you may know, the tax bill that came out of this body last session was one of the best tax bills for our friends in agriculture in recent memory, and that's almost entirely due to the stalwart dedication of Chair Rest. So thank you for your support of Minnesota agriculture. Minnesota farmers dig you, don't they? Our friends from FFA? Thank you. Thank you for your support on that front. Now, Ms. Heck, I did have one question. Some of the changes that we made a couple years ago, I believe, were intended to incentivize purchase over leasing, or to increase the amount of purchase versus leasing. Have those changes been effective in any way, or are you seeing fewer people leasing and more people selling, or is it new people buying? Could you just give a little bit more detail on that front, please?
Ms. Heck.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Senator, for the question. I have some data on the number of credits that have been approved, which does not necessarily reflect this increase in sales over the last few years. However, I think we could look, and I could get back to you all about total applications, how many were sales and how many were leases, because with about, more than 50% of people not represented in those credits that were issued, that data might not be very statistically significant. So I could get back to you with total applications, how many have been sales versus leases, but as far as the credits issued, we have not seen dramatic change there.
Senator Driscowski.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Maybe I should ask Senator Putnam this question, but they can apply within the first 10 years of farming. How many of them are repeat applicants? Maybe if you could kind of characterize that whole thing.
Ms. Sack.
That is thank you all. That is another great question that I could get back to you on. We do see quite a few repeat people who use this programs for 5-10 years and talk about how helpful it is when they're getting their feet in the ground in those early years. But we don't necessarily have that data. Anecdotally, maybe I could guess around half are using it every year and half are brand new, but we could look into some actual numbers rather than me guessing up here. Thank you.
Ms. Heck and Commissioner, I think that would be very interesting, useful, and maybe information that we should require. Thank you, Senator Driscowski, for bringing that question up. Anyone else? Then I would ask Mr. Darrell Larson to come forward. And with him at the table, please, Owen Bussey. Welcome to the committee, gentlemen. Mr. Larson, if you'd like to begin, please identify yourself for the record.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. For the record, my name is Darrell Larson, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to add my story to your discussion of the beginning farmer tax credit. To start with, I want to thank you, Chair Rest and Senator Putnam, and others on the committee for championing this issue. I understand that you carried a provision to lift the cap on the beginning farmer tax credit into the conference last session. I appreciate that. As I'll discuss, this would have been hugely helpful to our family, and I hope you'll be successful in making the important change to this session. My wife Arlene and I farmed and lived southwest of Little Falls in Morrison County. We raised crops and cattle on a fourth-generation farm homesteaded by my great-grandfather in 1876. But after nearly 150 years of my family farming that land, our 3 daughters weren't interested in leaving their careers to take over the farm. That's why we're grateful to find a wonderful young couple who wanted to take over our farm and continue operating it as we did with livestock and crops. Devin, sitting behind me, and his wife Avery have 3 years of farming experience and were able to work with us to qualify for the beginning farmer programs at USDA and Minnesota Department of Ag, MDA. They were even able to work with the same farm business management instructor we had. In particular, we were excited to work together to apply for the beginning farmer tax credit. We'd read about it in agricultural publications, and we thought it was a perfect program to help Arlene and I sell our farm and home in the same year. We worked together, mailed in our application, and got confirmation that it was complete. From there, our focus turned to our farm auction and building our new home across the road on some land we retained. We assumed we were in a good place. We'd met all the requirements for the credit, applied correctly, so we were factoring it into our financial decisions. Unfortunately, last week ago today, we learned when we were meeting with our tax preparers that we'd made a mistake, or that we were mistaken. Our tax preparer asked us for some documentation of the credit, and in calling MDA, I learned that we'd been denied. We were part of more than 50% of the applicants who were denied due to the lack of funding. Our tax burden is now extremely high. I mean, 18 to 20,000 additional in Minnesota tax in addition to our withholdings from our normal retirement incomes. And that's in addition to an estimated 60,000 in federal tax. It's still being worked up, so that's an estimate. That's a challenge because this transition has already been expensive and this farm sale needs to allow us to build our new home and carry us through retirement. Had we known that our application wouldn't be funded, we would have held off on selling some property until another calendar year. Resolving the shortfall, and from my perspective, helping folks who counted on the tax credit in 2025 is important for farmers like me. It's also important to the value of the credit. I'm a huge supporter and advocate for this program and getting beginning farmers on the land. But it's hard to tell my neighbors to use this credit knowing they can't count on it. I appreciate my farm organization, Minnesota Farmers Union, making this their top priority for the tax committee, and I thank the many other agricultural organizations who signed on to the letter included in your packets. Thank you, Chairman Rest and Senator Putnam and others for your leadership, and we work to ensure that this program works for farmers. This will benefit farmers for years to come.
Thank you, Mr. Larson. Senator Putnam, that part of the program, what did the revenue estimate show on that?
Madam Chair, I believe last session when we attempted to get rid of the
Cap.
cap, the revenue estimate was around $2 million. Someone can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it was 2.2 or 2.3. That's my memory.
Ms. Pollack, does that ring true to you?
Madam Chair, I would defer to Mr. Mumm, the fiscal analyst on
Mr.
this.
Mumm?
Madam Chair, I will find that out for you and
Okay.
let you know shortly.
Madam Chair, I'm close to certain that it's somewhere in
Okay.
that territory.
Is Joanna here?
Yeah, Mr. Lowry might be able to help us with that number, if you don't mind, Madam Chair.
Department of Revenue here? Do you have that information?
Madam Chair, I think Mr. Lowry does from the
Oh,
Farmers Union.
all right. We'll hear from Mr. Laurie, who was passing information to the department. But Mr. Laurie, we'll have it from you. It's just fine. Welcome to the committee. If you would identify yourself for the record.
Thank you, Chair Rest and members of the committee. For the record, my name is Stu Laurie, Government Relations Director for Minnesota Farmers Union. I just confirmed that with the department that I have the right revenue estimate, and the estimate was 1.3 in 2026 and 1.4 in 2027.
Okay.
Wasn't that far off.
So
I'm
you
sorry,
were-
Madam Chair, I was just self-congratulating because I wasn't that
You
far
weren't
off.
too far off, right. Thank you, Senator Putnam. Senator Putnam, is it your intent to ask in new legislation that the cap be removed, or just return to what we had before as a priority for the ag community?
Madam Chair, the preference would be to remove the cap in its entirety, especially when we see the number of people who are not able to avail themselves of the credit. And in fact, Madam Chair, if you wouldn't mind, I had a question for Mr. Larson. If he could.
Sure.
Mr. Larson, if you wouldn't mind, could you tell us a little bit? I mean, 52% of the people who are planning on this credit, who are committed to this credit, and we understand how difficult succession planning can be anyway. What happens to folks who can't avail themselves of the credit, like yourself, who've been denied after planning on for it? Like, do you have to postpone your retirement? What happens to the beginning farmer who you can't sell or lease to? Could you explain some of those things for us a little bit, please?
Mr. Larson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Senator Putnam, I believe each case is going to be different, but in my case, I would have definitely moved my machinery sales to another year if I had known that it wasn't funded, because it would have spread my tax burden over more than one calendar year. And I'm sure the case is different with each individual farmers. As Stu, maybe you've heard more than I have from farmers that are applying, but it comes into your financial decisions as far as what you can do and when you can do it. And we'd made the commitment to do everything in 2025, thinking we were going to be okay with our tax burden, and then found out that it wasn't funded. It was filled out properly, but it wasn't funded, so it really hit us with a whammo.
So a lot of it is the uncertainty of not being able to plan reliably
Right.
for how you're managing your farm business.
Right, and it certainly is a big help for somebody planning to make a sale when they can see where they can fit it in and make plan things to the end of their operation. You know, if your land goes and your machinery goes and it all goes in the same calendar year, that makes a big difference. But if you have to, and that helps to keep a farm in operation by doing it in the same year. The Johnsons bought my farm and they kept some of the same cattle we had and kept the farm going just as it was. But if you have to start piecemealing it off, that's what breaks up a lot of farms, I think.
Senator Drazkowski.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I mean, short of putting more money in the program, could it be reconfigured so that the credit for the beginning farmer actually takes place a year or two down the road, allowing the farmer selling and the Department of Agriculture to couple those together in the meantime, to give you that time? Has anybody thought about that? But there might be a way to delay the actual application of the credit for taxes to make certain that they connect.
That the planning feature is definitely there.
Well, that
Or celebrated or whatever.
the commitment of the
Counted on.
credit from the department is available for the farmer that's selling. And the problem that the gentleman talked about here could maybe be averted if he could plan his selling of the land and know that he's going to get the credit, to know that he's already got the application into the department for the credit, and the department says, yep, we've got the credit reserved for you, should you do that? And then maybe that may require mechanically that you actually make the payment of the credit for the purchaser happen later, maybe a year or two later or something like that. I don't know if anyone has thought about that, but short of adding more money, something like that might be
Sure.
another solution.
Well, I'm going to ask, I see Senator Putnam doing like this, so I'm going to ask him to have further discussion on that, and maybe that's something that we can take up later. Any other questions for Mr. Larson? Senator Weber.
Not a question, but a statement, basically. You know, as I look at the program, there are a couple of factors, I think, that besides the funding limits that are out there, that, excuse me, also, I think pose issues for the program. Number one has been the inability, for example, for much of it to be available between family members. Our testifier indicated that none of his, excuse me, the only thing I got at session last week was a cold, Madam Chair, so. But anyway, his three daughters weren't able or interested in continuing the farm. And quite frankly, we see that in many farm families where there is no one else, and so it makes it easier to go to the outside to sell to people. But in those instances where you have a child or a grandchild that would be interested in farming, many instances that family relationship keeps the credit from being available to them. And if we're looking at continuing the family farm, I think that's an element that we need to work on. Now, obviously, it makes more people qualified and probably creates a need for an expanded funding level than what we have had. But as you look at what the purpose of the program actually was, and people say, well, they're related, so they can have other deals. Well, in the case of our testifier, if he has three children, and if one of the grandchild was interested in farming, he also, as a parent, has a desire and a wish to make sure that his estate is dispersed fairly to all his heirs. And so how big an advantage can you give to one member of the family in order to get them to continue farming? And you can go, certainly most families would be accepting of it, but as a real estate appraiser, I have made a lot of money from fighting families, and and it does happen, and so I think those are also elements that we need to look at. And as we look at the cost of getting into farming nowadays. I came into the Senate in 2013, was my first year. At that time, back in my home county, the top selling farm was selling between $12,000 and $13,000 an acre. Today, the top selling farm is $19,300. Now you look at, and you look at the cost of equipment. You know, quite frankly, you don't find that much of a tractor for $200,000, $250,000 anymore. And so our costs continue to increase for the assets that are necessary to farm. And so I look at the fact that the amount was cut, but quite frankly, the demand is going to need to continue to increase if we are to continue to get young people into the business of farming.
Thank you, Senator Rover. Anyone else? Thank you, Mr. Larson.
Thank you.
We now welcome Owen Bussey. If you'd
Thank you,
identify
Chair Rest.
yourself for the record.
Thank you, Chair Rest, and members of the committee. For the record, my name is Owen Bussey, and I am a student at Glencoe Silver Lake. As a young person who wants nothing more than to farm, I thank you for your work on the beginning farmer tax credit. First, let me introduce myself. I'm a junior at GSL, and I'm very active in FFA in my school. After school, I want to farm. We have a small family farm just south of Glencoe, Minnesota that my grandpa operates. My dad wasn't able to farm due to there wasn't enough room for income on the farm. So I'm hoping that one day I will take over my family legacy. It's how I see myself contributing to my community and our state. I'm willing to work hard for that, but I also know that the cost and availability of land is going to be a big barrier. I won't have any land to work hard on. That's why I appreciate the opportunity to comment on MDA's beginning farmer tax credit report. One thing that it shows is that half of the applicants for this credit are being turned away due to the lack of funding. For me as a young person and someone who wants to count on the credit to help me negotiate with landowners, this is a big concern, and I appreciate that you've been working hard on it. This is important not to just me, but lots of young people in ag and outside of ag. That's why, with a group of my fellow FFA students, we chose to do an ag issues presentation on land availability. They are here with me this morning. Our topic was the ground is gold, which basically talked about the price of land in my county. The average land price for McLeod County is $11,000 an acre per Minnesota Farm Bureau report. That is very expensive for young farmers trying to get into an industry, especially with rising equipment prices and other inputs. I appreciate your work on this issue. It's an investment not just in young people like me, but also the future of our rural communities. Thank you, and I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bussey. Are there questions or comments for him? I don't see any, but thank you very much. We really appreciate hearing your story, and I bet it's a familiar one to some of your fellow students as well. So we hope to certainly revisit that program insofar as we're able, and maybe with some of the suggestions that Senator Drazkowski has provided to Senator Putnam, we can continue improving it. Thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you, Madam Rest.
The second report we're hearing today is from the Minnesota Department of Revenue, the Property Values and Assessment Practices Report. Mr. Johnson. Okay. And there is a one-page map as he's coming forward that I would draw members' attentions to. He may be referring to it, so. I would also point out that there's a letter in your packets signed by a number of organizations also supporting removing the cap from the beginning farmer credit. welcome to the committee. If you would identify yourself for the record.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Good morning. My name is Evan Johnson. I'm a state program administrator at the Minnesota Department of Revenue. I'm the author of the Property Values and Assessment Practices Report, and I'm grateful to be able to be here to present some of the data from this year's report. So the Assessment Practices Report has been mandated since 2001 to provide a report on property values and trends. This was combined in 2012 with a requirement for an annual report on the Green Acres program, which began then, or was updated then. This report looks at regional trends and values, as well as has sections on special programs, sales ratio data, and tax distribution. One key is that this report does not examine causality, say for major legislative changes that affects formulas or eligibility, as we'll see with the homestead market value exclusion portion later in the report. One thing as well, due to when data is submitted, the 2026 report covers data through the 2025 assessment year for taxes payable in 2026. So I'll be speaking in terms of assessment years throughout this report for taxes payable in the following year after that. This is sometimes abbreviated as AY, so AY 2025 is for the 2025 assessment year. So for the data that is being presented, most of the data that we're talking about is the changes in the estimated market value for different property types. So the estimated market value is the value that the assessor sets on a property that represents the price that a property would sell for in a typical sale. The estimated market value is the first value used in the tax calculation process. So any special programs that provide deferrals or exclusions are then taken away from that estimated market value to create a taxable market value afterwards, but does not actually change that estimated market value. So this report focuses on what that initial value set by the assessor is. This data is provided to the Department of Revenue by way of PRISM submissions from all 87 counties, which is the Property Record Information System of Minnesota electronic submission process. Counties submit 4 PRISM submissions per year. For the report, we use PRISM 2 submissions submitted September of the assessment year. So for 2025, they were submitted in September of 2025. And that provides that final estimated market value of parcels after the Board of Appeal and Equalization process, after property owners have been able to appeal their property values and classification. Prior year data is from the finalized PRISM 3 submissions in April following the assessment year. That's the final data after kind of taxes have been extended. So there are sometimes some slight changes if you look at historical reports between that PRISM 2 and PRISM 3 data as well. So looking at the first graph in the report is the statewide change in estimated market value from year over year. This shows that change for the 6 main categories of properties that we examine, as well as other property types and the total statewide change in estimated market value. So throughout the report, most of the measurements are measuring the percent change year over year. This allows easier like-for-like comparisons rather than just looking at the raw numbers in terms of how much changed. So when comparing the estimated market value year to year, it's also important to that these increases do include new construction or classification changes from one property to another. It's just looking at the percentage change of all estimated market value of a certain property type to the same value of that same property type the following year. And that is included the new construction or classification changes are in addition to then any static appreciation of value of that type of property. There will, however, be some comparisons of value that don't include that, which we will look at later as well. The property types that we do look at as part of the report in more depth are agricultural and rural vacant land. But these are both homesteaded and non-homesteaded. Apartments, which also share a classification with non-exempt hospitals. And then for this report, we also include low-income rental housing and some other smaller classifications in there as well. Residential properties, both homestead and non-homestead properties that contain up to 3 units. This also includes short-term rental properties, which share a classification with non-homestead residential properties 1 to 3 units. The other is a seasonal residential recreational non-commercial, sometimes abbreviated as SRR, as that is a bit of a mouthful. And these are usually referred to as, or thought of as cabins as well. Commercial property, various types of commercial property, and then lastly, industrial property, which includes property used for manufacturing, warehouses, and distribution facilities. I'll cover each property type more in more detail as we move through the report, but there are some broad trends shown here in the statewide graphs. So agricultural land increased at a lower rate than the last several years, especially in 2023, which you can see was a very, very large increase. It was the largest increase that we have, that we've seen in our data going back to 2005. Apartments have had much smaller increases.
Excuse me. How do you account for that spike for ag land?
Madam Chair, one of the things of this report does not examine causality necessarily for the changes in value, but that was a year where, speaking to assessors, it was just something where they're following what the market is doing. And so in my recollection, that was something where agricultural land value prices really had just skyrocketed in the year before that they were using to base their values off of.
So that's, the ag property spiked in 2023. There was an increase in residential property and one in seasonal rec, not one in commercial. I'm just trying to think of what economic events were happening, not only in Minnesota, but across the country, that would show the drop, for example, in commercial property. In 2025, is that the emptying of, is that the pandemic, or is that the people working from home still, so their commercial buildings are not being used, people are not going to work in order to work? Is that a likely explanation for that, which across the country, and certainly in metropolitan areas, we see a lot of empty commercial buildings or attempts at conversions into apartments, but I don't see necessarily a drop the drop in commercial. If you look over to apartments, that doesn't seem to be a particular spike during that year. It would be of great interest to have some analysis done, economic analysis done, and I think you're telling me that what you're doing is just presenting the facts. You don't have any analysis. Is that correct? I'm not blaming you, but I mean, it would really make this report have a whole lot more power to it if there was some economic analysis of it. Otherwise, it's just, well, it goes up and down. And what can we learn from it? And with just the numbers, I think it amounts to a lot of guessing. So you can continue. Oh, Senator Drazkowski.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I don't know if it might be part of the explanation, but, you know, after the 2020 Minneapolis riots, we had an exodus from the core metro area outward of people moving, and that could have had a spillover effect. Certainly, you know, when people come out from the cities and buy up agricultural land, it jacks the price up. So it could have had some of that effect, I think. Just a thought.
What was happening in 2020? You refer to riots? I'm just asking. Over what? Ah, okay, okay. Sorry, I should have connected the date better. I wouldn't have called them riots anyway, but nevertheless, certainly, there was a lot of outrage expressed at his murder. Senator Hemsing-Nager.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just kind of a question for you, Mr. Johnson, just so I'm reading this chart properly. So this is a statewide change in estimated market value. So anything positive is still going to be an increase in the market value. It's the bars below that would indicate a decrease in the market value. So as I'm reading this, the different sectors, we're seeing an increase in market value overall, just maybe not at the same rate as other years, correct?
Madam Chair, Senator, yes. So yes, this is, any positive number does represent still an increase in estimated market value from year over year. And then the few bars that do have decreases that are negative. This report does also go into a region-specific breakdowns for different property types where there are some more increases and decreases for the estimated market value for different types of properties.
Thank you. Continue.
And yes, and certainly, Madam Chair, to kind of address a little bit of your question previously regarding the usefulness of the report, certainly within property taxes, because assessors are following what the market is doing by setting their estimated market values. This also can cause tax shifts based on what types of properties are increasing or decreasing. So in the sense of the value of the report, that yes, it does not necessarily go into causality. Certainly, personally, anecdotally, I was starting to look for a house in 2021, and mortgage interest rates were very, very low, which was part of the appeal for looking for a house around that time. But also, as a result of that, the market was very difficult to buy in as well. So that's just anecdotally, but in terms of that time period.
I just heard on the report this morning that the mortgage rates have gone just slightly below 6%, and that's a low point for the for some period of time. So that's that can be encouraging news for home buyers.
Yeah.
Although it seems like it still seems like a very high rate. Senator Nelson.
Oh, thank you, Madam Chair. Well, just a comment, as we're looking at these increases in estimated market value, it's, and like you said, these are facts, and trying to put together why is something we'll cogitate on. But it's interesting to me that the greatest increases in general were in agricultural, rural vacant, and seasonal non-commercial properties. Now, I don't know if that's, maybe there's smaller numbers, so the prices, so the average varies more. But it would be interesting to know, in addition to this chart, kind of overlay how many properties in each of these categories made up this estimated market value change. That would help us, I think, understand a little bit better what's happening. Thank you.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, Senator,
Mr. Johnson.
in the report, it does list when we get into the property-specific types and changes, it will list out the total estimated market value of all of those properties in a specific region. So that can give some indication of showing how much value is in that property, and therefore with the percentage changes, how that affects things. In terms of exact numbers of properties, that would be something where I don't have that information in front of me, but certainly could find that information in terms of how many of those types of properties were sold or are classified as such in the state.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think that would be an
Senator
important, perhaps, piece of information, especially if it's digital, so we can overlay that and search it. Thank you so much.
Sure. You may continue.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Senator. So Finishing off just a few of the other property types, for industrial property, saw smaller increases in 2024 and 2025 after kind of those larger increases in prior years. Commercial, as pointed out, has seen smaller increases compared to some of the other property types. We do have a category for all other types of property. However, we don't get into too much detail in the report about those types of property, as there's a limited amount of market value within each type. Some of those are forest property, minerals, personal property that's taxable, which has wide variety in and of itself. And so we look at it, but don't go as in-depth for looking at the trends in there. And then certainly on a statewide level, the total value of all estimated market value in the state of Minnesota increased by 3.7% in 2025, which was just about the same as in 2024. So as I had mentioned, we do look at this report based on a regional breakdown as well. To do that, we use what we refer to as VOS regions from the Property Tax Burden or VOS report. So these regions are in that report, and so I use them to also look at the regions for this report. So there are 10 regions in greater Minnesota that are part of the VOS region. I believe this is the other handout that you have as well, as well as then 10 regions within the metro area. And so this does help us identify trends, and especially in greater Minnesota, there's obviously a wide discrepancy of different types of properties, and so it makes it a lot easier for us to be able to look at trends in a more nuanced view of the different types of property within both greater Minnesota and within the metro. Looking at the percent change in estimated market value in greater Minnesota VOS regions. So this is the 10 regions and the just changes in EMV, again, percentage-wise, from 2020 through 2025. So this also does have that region's total estimated market value on the left next to where it says the region in millions of dollars. There's certainly, when looking at the total change, there's going to be a lot of overlap between the total change for a region and that region's kind of primary type of property that gives it a lot of the market value. So, for example, the Southwest region, 75% of the property of the estimated market value is agricultural and rural vacant land. So the numbers here that show that percent change in market value are going to be very, very similar as to its percent change, that region's percent change for agricultural land as well. But overall, kind of looking at the table overall, some regions did see larger increases than in 2024, some smaller, and then with 2 regions with some decreases in market value as well. And looking historically, as you saw in the earlier graph, 2023 had large increases in agricultural land, whereas 2022 had large increases in residential land, which can also be seen here on a region-specific basis. For the Metro VOS regions, there is less of a range between the largest and smallest values for 2025. There in Minneapolis, EMV decreased by 0.1%, but otherwise all other regions saw increases in market value, some of them smaller than others though. Regardless, these are still smaller increases than the region saw for in 2020 for every region except for Carver and Scott, which had seen relatively steady increases looking back over the last 5 years. So looking at specific
Senator Drazkowski.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So if you look at this this table, it solidifies part of my hypothesis here, Madam Chair.
Okay.
If you look at Minneapolis, they were with the rest of the pack on their page in 2020, and 2021, there's a huge deviation between them and their surrounding VOS regions, and look at 2022 and 2020, well, especially 2022, just a huge difference between not only them and the surrounding suburban VOS regions, but also certainly the rural ones as well. And then 2024 and 2025, a continuation of that deviation. I do remember a lot of reports about people leaving Senator Dibble's district for somewhere else.
Well, it
Back then.
seems to me, I'm calling just a second, I just want to make Senator Dibble. But in 2023, the deviation between the regions is not as pronounced. And so I would have a question of how is that accounted for? But Senator Dibble, do you have a comment?
Thank you. You'll notice the civil unrest occurred quite a few years ago. Since that time, we had COVID, of course, and we had a dramatic change in work patterns and the like. And
Sure.
we're very aware, of course, and we've had discussion about conversion of,
Right, which I mentioned,
commercial
yeah.
downtown into residential. I think there's a lot of factors that go into the overall property values in Minneapolis. So reaching for, best guesses and the like isn't useful. And in fact, overall, metro area population has increased. I'm looking at an article here right now. I'm going to send to the committee. I will say that my district in particular remains, housing remains quite stable and it defies all the other larger trends. So if we're going to talk about specific districts, let's just stop speculating here in the context of a public hearing. And let's just, pull some facts out and talk about what really drives these numbers.
I continue to think it is helpful when we see these numbers to know what's going on in the economy affecting particularly the cities and that phenomenon, not so much of civic unrest, but of COVID. Seems to me the biggest factor is COVID, where people stayed at home to work, and that affected women more than any other group of persons, because women still remain the primary child caregivers or child care responsibilities. And so when workers were ordered back to the downtowns, or in our case to state employees, providing child care became, in some instances, an untenable burden. And it might be, causing Aldi's to start up in downtown St. Paul to take the place of the Lenz and Byerly's grocery store there. But it still means that there's an additional expense on families where there are two earners, where one of them is considered the primary child caregiver and just can't afford $20,000, $25,000 to take care of infants in safe child care settings. So anyway, but I appreciate that perspective, Senator Dibble. Thank you. Go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Looking at the agricultural, change in agricultural land market value, we look at this primarily in the greater Minnesota VOS regions, as over 96% is located in those greater Minnesota regions. The second column there has both the estimated market value for the agricultural land in each region, as well as that percentage share of the entirety of that region's market value. The Arrowhead region has 8.2% of all of the market value in that region is either agricultural or that to be rural vacant land as well. The agricultural market value in 2025 fell in 3 regions, which was the smallest increase since 21, in 5 others as well. After that 2023, the very large increases, the increases have gone back down, or in some instances decreased a little bit in comparison. Southwest and South Central had some of the largest increases in agricultural land in 2023, and now they are showing some small decreases in 2025. in West Central, Northwest Headwaters also saw the largest increases in any greater Minnesota region in 2025. However, these were still smaller than in 2024 by over 10 percentage points. So overall, even the larger increases are still smaller than the increases that we saw in 2023 and 2024. And these gaps, again, kind of do show those differences between the regions when looking at the different types of values. Well, one of the other important things for agricultural property is agricultural homestead, which is a lot of complicated kind of ways to qualify. Some of the basic ways that, you know, if you live and occupy your agricultural property, you will likely qualify for agricultural homestead there. If it's occupied by a relative, that can qualify as well. Unoccupied property can still receive agricultural homestead called special agricultural homestead. There are acreage requirements and other farming requirements as part of that. But point being that it's a very important program and causes a classification rate to go from 1% down to 0.5% for the first tier of value that's set. And so this report does look at the proportion of acres that are homesteaded versus non-homesteaded for each region. This is something where it shows the report, this graph shows from the 2016 assessment year, which is the first year that we had really good, the PRISM was introduced and we had really good parcel specific data through the 2024 assessment. Because 2025, the data was still preliminary, the homestead figures are always a little bit off, and so we just used through 2024 as well. There is a great variety between regions, certainly, but the kind of thing that has been kind of steadily happening is that that percentage of homesteaded property has decreased for every region since 2016, with some bumps here and there depending on the region. But that is something, there haven't been any law changes that will restrict any sort of agricultural homestead, and the only law change was to add more qualifying relatives for occupied property. So this is just something that seems to be happening just from fewer properties qualifying for agricultural homestead over that time period. Looking at apartments as another type of property, this has been, we start in the metro VOS regions for this, as it's over 80% of statewide market value as part of it. Apartment values did rise slightly statewide. However, throughout the metro, they have fallen in the past 2 years. They decreased by 9% total throughout all metro regions, 0.9% in 2025 and 1.6% in 2024. This is something where more regions saw decreases this year than last year, although at slightly smaller magnitudes, especially in Minneapolis, which does have that largest value as there within all the metro regions. And as that statewide graph kind of showed earlier, apartments had seen increases in market value by more than 10% kind of regularly between 2020 and 2023. Going back even further, if you look at previous reports, this is something where there's a very kind of steady trend of more than 10% growth or increase in EMV within the metro. This really has stopped in 2024 and 2025. Carver, Scott, and Washington were the only regions that had increases in both years in 24 and 25. However, the next slide shows that this is kind of more due to new construction or classification changes. So this, the numbers we've been looking at before, again, are just estimated market value, so that includes new construction classification changes. This CCEMV is referred to as constant class EMV. That we kind of created as a measure to look and try and isolate just kind of that static appreciation in value for these types of properties. So this is just looking at, this excludes all value that saw new construction or classification changes, and instead just looks at just the value of properties that did not have any new construction or any classification changes from or away. And so this basically is just kind of trying to look at that static appreciation of value. So despite the fact that Carver, Scott, and Washington did see increases in market value in 2025, when you eliminate new construction and class changes to and from the apartment classifications, there were actually slight decreases in value. And so this is something where showing basically that throughout all metro regions, if you aren't looking at any sort of new construction, the market values fell throughout all regions for apartment type properties. It's generally this type of constant class EMV is almost always smaller, but usually it's only by a few percent rather than kind of these larger drops here that we see in 2025. St. Paul and Anoka instead also then had smaller gaps, as you can kind of see, which does suggest that that is more due to those decreases in value rather than not having new construction. So for Greater Minnesota, we look at regions that have at least $1 billion in estimated market value for apartments. Smaller than that, you get into more kind of wild swings, and so that's kind of the minimum that we set for a lot of these property types. Southeast and Central have the largest amount of market value and the largest shares of regional market value within Greater Minnesota, and have the 7th and 9th largest kind of nominal EMV looking at all regions, metro included. And so those saw larger increases in market value, certainly, although they did have the increases were smaller than they had seen in 2024. On the other hand, Arrowhead, South Central, and West Central all saw increases greater than those in 2024, with Arrowhead as the only region with a double-digit increase in apartment values in 2025. Looking at the same type of chart, again with that constant class EMV, we see kind of similar where there is that difference between the constant class and the normal EMV. So again, that is suggesting that a lot of these increases in market value are due to new construction or classification changes as well. So moving to residential property. Residential property represents a majority of market value in every metro VOS region that we examine. There were larger increases for all regions in 2025 compared to 2024, although some of them were higher, some were lower when comparing to 2023. And then all of these were, again, decreases compared to 2022, where, again, 2022 saw those really, really large increases in residential properties statewide. In 2025, there were kind of somewhat similar magnitude of increases when compared to 2020. And then again, kind of if you look back even a little bit further to past reports looking at between 2017 through 2020, that's something where those had even higher increases in market value. And so that has been kind of a trend where since kind of 2020 and before, other than 2022, these increases are not quite as large in 2024 and 2025 compared to those previous historical years. Many regions saw larger increases compared in residential property compared to that region's increase as a whole, which means that then for most of those regions, that market share of how much of market value in a region is in residential value did increase. So there is a graph here. It is a little bit messy trying to fit all 10 regions on the screen. And as a result, it's not actually in the report itself. But you can see increases from 2024 to 2025 for multiple regions, especially Minneapolis and St. Paul. Looking back further, proportions have increased for many regions, but have decreased or stayed relatively flat for others. Most regions saw spikes in 2022 after that, large increases in residential property, but then drops in 2023 as those increases weren't quite as much and some other types of property increased as well. So Anoka and Dakota have decreased. North Hennepin is about the same as it was in 2016. Washington has been relatively similar. Southwest Hennepin has seen the largest increase in residential share of market value since 2016 at 3%, followed by St. Paul at 2.1%. And some increases would be larger if you measured from 2020, which was, again, kind of a lower point from there. And again, this kind of proportion of market value is important with respect to kind of looking at where the tax base is, where there are classification rates, where residential property is generally taxed at a lower rate than things like apartments or commercial or industrial properties. However, certainly, the larger the market share of residential properties, then the more of that tax burden is going to fall on them. Looking at kind of a similar table for Greater Minnesota, residential market value increased along similar, if slightly higher lines as the metro VOS regions. There's more variety in Greater Minnesota regarding kind of the proportion that residential market value makes up of the market. Some regions like Central, Arrowhead, and East Central have a majority of market value in residential property, Others like Southeast have kind of a plurality, but not necessarily a majority. And then others like Southwest and Minnesota Valley have kind of more of a minority of residential market value compared to other property types, generally agricultural. There was variety as to whether these were larger or smaller increases than in 2024 from 2025. Higher increases for 6 regions, lower than in 4. And certainly Arrowhead and West Central had larger increase, smaller than last year, but certainly still had somewhat moderate increases there as well. And then looking at the same graph in terms of that proportion of market value, each region grew from 2016 and peaked in 2022, but then has kind of fallen slightly since and kind of otherwise has just generally been a lot more flat than a lot of the metro regions. Not quite as much the same types of increases in residential values in comparison. Briefly, we'll look at the seasonal residential recreational properties, SRR for short. This is very geographically dependent. So again, this is only regions that have at least $1 billion of market value in their region. There's lots of value in North Central and then kind of descending from there down to Southwest Hennepin as the only metro region that has over $1 billion in seasonal residential property. So the increases in 2020, increases have been very similar to residential types of property in the last few years, which makes some sense as they're both kind of residential properties, but just in terms of the use is different, whether they're being used as a house, a primary home versus a cabin or something equivalent. But that is kind of region dependent depending on kind of where you're looking. There have been larger increases in market value compared to residential property for looking at all these regions, for all of them except for the West Central. And then there are also bigger gaps in that constant class market value compared to residential property, which does suggest that some of the increases in market value in this seasonal property is due to new construction or class changes compared to the same kind of type for residential properties. With commercial market value, the metro as a whole saw a decrease of 2.6% in 2025. This is a larger decrease in 2025 than there was in 2021. Fewer regions saw decreases, but some of the decreases were larger, especially with Minneapolis in compared to 2021. From the table, the report does show that this was split among several regions. Half the regions saw decreases in market value, and then those that did see increases, all but Dakota was relatively small. And then almost all of these were smaller increases or larger decreases than in 2024. And then again, looking at that changes compared to that constant class market value, we really don't see that much of a difference between the two. As with apartments, all regions did see a decrease in constant class EMV. However, there's a much smaller gap between that market value and CCEMV compared to, again, like with apartments or some other types of properties. That does kind of suggest, again, that these decreases are not because things are being, classification changes are being made away from commercial property or there's, properties being torn down or anything like that. So looking at that proportion graph for commercial property, so all regions have seen a decrease since 2016. Some regions have seen smaller decreases, such as Washington, Anoka, and Carver and Scott, but others, especially regions with larger proportions, have seen much larger decreases. So the top 2 in 2016 and still in 2025, Southeast Hennepin and Minneapolis, have decreased by more than 5 percentage points when looking at that proportion of that region's EMV. Suburban Ramsey decreased by 4.4 percentage points as well. And again, these decreases do have implications for the tax base, especially because commercial and industrial properties do have that much higher classification rate compared to residential property. For greater Minnesota VOS regions for commercial, there have been a lot of increases in the last few years. All regions have seen increases in EMV since 2022, though certainly most of the regions do have lower baseline numbers than the metro, subsequent or similar metro regions. The Southeast region does have the 3rd highest commercial market value in the state, though proportionally it's a little bit more in the middle. It is the largest region in terms of market value overall. And so that is certainly something where those increases are a little bit more in terms of real dollar values. Arrowhead, Minnesota Valley, and West Central all saw increases over 8%, and South Central had the lowest increase at 3%. So it's something where, for a lot of these regions, there are seeing just kind of more increases. And then looking at that kind of CC-EMV comparison again, this is something where there is a little bit more of a gap in comparison to metro regions. So that does suggest that there, again, is a little bit more new construction or classification changes as part of that. Arrowhead and Minnesota Valley have those large gaps that, again, show kind of that there's those new construction or class changes there. However, despite those increases, looking at kind of the proportion graph, that proportion has decreased for every region since 2016, although at a bit of a smaller magnitude, and then has been kind of relatively flat since 2022 or 2023 for a lot of those regions as well. Industrial property is the last property type that we cover. It is also the smallest that we look at. With that, so especially when looking at individual regions, again, there can be kind of more swings as a result. Central and Southeast continue to see large market value growth in industrial property, and Central's increase double that of last year. In the Metro, Carver and Scott and Dakota had increases of over 7%, which were slightly a little bit down from last year, whereas on the other end, Southwest Hennepin and Anoka saw small decreases. North Hennepin has the largest amount of industrial market value and the largest market value share as well, in compared to the region as a whole. That saw just a 2% increase, which is less than that 6% increase in 2024, and certainly much lower than the increases in 2022 and 2023 that were over 20%. Again, looking at that constant class comparison, several regions did have kind of large differences. Central, Southeast, and Carver-Scott all had big gaps, again, between those changes in constant class and the nominal EMV. So again, suggesting that new construction and classification changes towards industrial. Then Dakota, however, did not, despite having kind of one of the larger increases, that was something that appeared to be more just due to that static appreciation in value. So moving to exclusions, which is the other exclusions and deferrals, which is the other portion of this report. We look at this graph shows the distribution of the percent of properties, homestead properties that received certain amounts of the homestead market value exclusion. So the homestead market value exclusion is based on a mathematical formula based on the estimated market value of the property that is either classified as residential homestead for residential properties or the house, garage, and first acre of agricultural homesteads. All homesteads do automatically qualify, except that if a property is receiving the homestead exclusion for veterans with a disability, it cannot also receive the homestead market value exclusion. It receives the veterans exclusion instead. So in 2025, that's 1.7% of homesteads that receive that veterans exclusion instead. But looking at the graph itself in 2025, so 16.95% of homestead properties did not receive any sort of homestead market value exclusion because the properties were valued too highly. Then kind of moving up from there, about 6.5% received between $0 and $5,000, 9%, $5,000 and $10,000, et cetera, in terms of looking at kind of how that graph works. With it being stacked. The 2024 assessment was the first year in which the new formula was expanded, that expanded the exclusion to a maximum of $38,000. So you can see that shift as a result of that legislation. So given the relatively kind of low increases in residential property, the numbers of kind of what types of property received the exclusion didn't change that much between 2024 and 2025. However, there are approximately 1.7% more homesteads that aren't receiving the exclusion as of 2025, and then fewer properties are receiving that maximum level of the exclusion as well. So that's something where even with that legislative change in 2024, that's almost 17% is the largest number of properties that are not receiving the exclusion other than in 2022 and 2023. After residential values had increased and before that legislative change took place. So about 60% of properties are receiving exclusion amounts less than 20,000, kind of serving as a midpoint for that total amount of exclusion that can be sought. And while we can't really compare directly due to that change in formula, in 2017, only 35% were receiving less than 15,000 in the exclusion, kind of again serving as that midpoint. So kind of the amount that homesteads are receiving of the exclusion has kind of shifted to be more near the top half of the exclusion to now be kind of more near the bottom half of the exclusion there as well. In terms of raw dollar amounts, in 2025, there's $24.4 billion excluded as a result of the homestead market value exclusion, which is about the same as was excluded in 2018 at $24.8 billion. The last deferral that the last kind of two deferrals that we'll look at today for the report are the Green Acres. Green Acres is a very important deferral for agricultural land where qualifying properties have value deferred to where taxes are calculated on the value of the agricultural land without any non-agricultural influence. So if there's non-agricultural influence, usually development pressure, the property is on lakeshore or something like that, then Green Acres causes the taxes to be calculated based on the value of the agricultural land as agricultural land rather than as for development land or something similar. So this graph shows the amount of acres enrolled as well as the percent of value of the land that was deferred. The percentage deferred has hovered between high 15% to the high of 21% in 2022, and again that's something that tracks with the changes that we saw in other types of property because we saw a lot of increases in residential property in 2022. So as a result, therefore, there was more value being excluded as a result of Green Acres because those values were increasing and there was potentially more development pressure on land enrolled in Green Acres. So then subsequently then in 2023, when agricultural values increased a lot, then again that percentage deferred amount decreased as a result. So that's kind of, you can generally guess which way that percentage deferred value is going to go based on how the values of agricultural land versus residential land or other types of improved property are increasing or decreasing that year. So in 2025, because agricultural values went up by 1.4% statewide, whereas residential values increased by 4.6% statewide, it's not very surprising that percentage deferred amount did increase slightly. Enrolled acres have decreased since 2020, and there hasn't been any sort of major law changes to the statute since 2011. And so that is something where those amount of acres are just simply not qualifying anymore as a result. The companion program to Green Acres is the Rural Preserve Program that does that same type of deferral to be rural vacant land rather than to the agricultural land. There are stricter requirements to enroll in Rural Preserve. Properties can only enroll if the property is homesteaded and at least a portion of the property is enrolled in Green Acres. So it is harder to qualify for Rural Preserve in comparison. We do, because again, one of the requirements is that you have to be enrolled in Green Acres. The enrollment is relatively similar in terms of the trends from 2020 onward. And then that percent deferred is a little bit more variable and is generally higher because as a result of it being that to be rural vacant land that has then been changing as well. And then lastly, this table shows the statewide amount of taxable market value. So taxable market value does include those deferrals and exclusions that we discussed for all the property types that we have examined, and then does have preliminary estimates of the net taxes due for each type of property. There's a little bit of rounding in here, so in terms of the share, market value net tax may add up to close to 100%, but not quite. The proportions then on the right do have the increase or decrease from that previous year, from assessment year 2024 for payable 2025. We do see that effects of lower classification rates for agricultural property in terms of that difference between the market value share and the tax share, as well as then the higher classification rates for commercial and industrial property with, again, that lower market value share and higher net tax share. So that also then shows in terms of the changes. So for example, commercial property, the share of all value in the state decreased by 0.2%, but because it has that higher classification rate, that net tax share decreased by 0.7%, and kind of on the flip side with agricultural land there as well. One of the things to highlight is the kind of largest change was that of residential properties. So residential properties, the share of residential properties increased by 0.7%, and increased the net tax share by 0.9%. And those values of the market value share and net tax share for residential properties have converged. So previously, the market value share was anywhere between 3 or 4% higher than the net tax. However, then in the last few years, in 2024 and 2025, it's only been a difference of about 1.5%, or 1.5% in 2024 and 2025. So again, that's again kind of showing that change in the tax base as a result of property types with higher classification rates decreasing and more residential property kind of taking on the tax burden. So that does conclude my presentation of this year's assessment practices report. The report can be found on the Department of Revenue's website, as well as all the historical reports. And certainly I thank you, Madam Chair, and committee members for inviting me here today. And I'm happy to answer any additional questions that you may have.
Sure, Mr. Johnson, my eyes clouded over with page after page of numbers, I must say. And I was trying to, earlier, what can we notice going on outside of the changes in these numbers in either our daily lives or in the economy? And I think that as I was thinking through that, the better question is which of these numbers are a surprise to us, given the opinions, the experiences, the biases that we come to thinking about the burden of property taxes on, and who bears that burden, but with regard to market values and so forth. And I'm hoping that, to look back at this or to keep this in my folder here, because I think when people are going to come in and talking about wanting decreases in property taxes, that we need to go back and look at these charts and see what has happened over time in these different, at least in the last 5 years, 6 years, and what, and is there any kind of intervention that needs to happen with regard to, well, we don't want to see something go down that far, and so what should we do to even it out or to mitigate that kind of change? And we get proposals to make improvements, but I think those proposals now, when we get them, we should be looking back at is that problem that maybe a proposal is trying to solve, is it borne out in these numbers, which which don't have any politics behind them? They have none. They just have the facts of the matter that through your analysis, the analysis that produces the numbers, not any conclusions about them, we have them before us and we can start asking questions of any proposals against the background of these charts that you've presented us. So it's very dense and at times hard to follow, but I do appreciate it. Senator Nelson.
Madam Chair, Mr. Johnson, this is a treasure trove of information. I just want to congratulate you on how this was all organized and put together so we could maybe understand some trends. And as the chair said, this is just facts, but I'm going to ask you something. I don't know if you can answer it, but one of the things that really stuck out as an outlier was 2022. 2022, we saw property estimated market values increase dramatically, it looked like across the state. And I'm just trying to think.
Why?
Why? Were there some outstanding, I don't know, worldwide, statewide events? Why was 2022 such a increase in that estimated market value? If you have an answer or hypotheses, I'd be interested.
Mr. Johnson, you don't have to speculate, but you can, like the rest of us, you're certainly free to do that in this group.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair, Senator. So yes, certainly I can't speculate, and the report, again, just does seek to lay out kind of what the facts are from the market value. One thing I do want to clarify, kind of in terms of thinking about where the timing is for this, is that values are set on January 2nd of the assessment year based on sales studies from that previous year.
The sales ratio studies?
Exactly. And so certainly in the sense of that, for that January 2nd, 2022 assessment year, a lot of that is going to be based on sales that occurred from fall of 2020 through fall of 2021, kind of as a result.
So the things that are happening in those periods really are important. And of course, we had COVID and that huge shift to remote work. Senator Dibble.
Thank you. I can speculate.
We can all guess.
So we do, right? Senator Drazkowski speculates all the time, and I'd send emails in response. So I got 2 emails in your inbox, by the way, Senator Drazkowski. My mom passed away right around that time, and we fixed up her house and sold it, and we sold, not a super great house, but we fixed it up pretty nice, but it wasn't a super great house, smallish house in the southeastern corner of Minneapolis, not far from Minnehaha Falls. And that year there was we were anxious because the fix-up took us a lot longer and we spent a lot more, as that happens. And we kind of missed the warm weather sale months. There was a snowfall. We were very anxious because they say that the home sale season drops off precipitously as soon as the first snow comes. But au contraire, we had a bidding war for her house. And the reason was, and this was, kind of held steady for, quite a while during the COVID era. And the reason being, of course, was that people just weren't selling. So there was very little on the market. And so those who did need to or want to buy, it was very much the seller's market at that time. And so that was driving up costs, even for fairly modest. I wouldn't say her house was ramshackle, but it took quite a bit of effort to get it up into saleable shape for a young couple that was going to start a family. And so we were happy, of course. We got a good price. So that was driving a lot of the dynamic then. There was just people just weren't putting. Interest rates weren't even that great then, and it was still driving up a lot of demand among buyers.
Yeah, thank you. Senator Drazkowski.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, I look forward to Senator Dibble's emails, but Madam Chair, COVID happened across all of Minnesota. It happened in Wabasha County, it happened in Hennepin County, it happened in Cook County. So COVID happened all across the state. That doesn't explain it. It's something else.
Madam Chair.
And so, I think we need to think a little bit deeper, and certainly the timing of the riots in Minneapolis, Democrats like to call it civil unrest and make it, they burned down the 3rd precinct. Did we forget? It was horrible what took place in Minneapolis, and the following couple of years, we heard over and over again how people were leaving Minneapolis, and we're still hearing the effects of commercial property in Minneapolis and the Twin Cities generally. And, senators, we can deny that, but it's real, and it happened. And certainly, values are set by supply and demand, and supply and demand are we can have Senator Weber explain it to us, but certainly that's got an effect, and we can we can pull our hood over our face and pretend it's not happening or it didn't happen, but it happened and it had a regional impact. And I don't know how much of it is explained in these numbers, but certainly appears to me that the riots in Minneapolis in 2020 had fallout in the last 5 years, and that's part of what we're seeing here. Thank you, Madam Chair.
And Senator Drazkowski, that's why I'm going to keep this chart here in my folder for when people come with solutions. You know, we can call, we can name publicly or in our hearts what happened in Minneapolis in 2020, and we all experienced it, even if we interpret it differently. But we did have COVID as well, and we did have this move to remote work, and I think that move to remote work, which I don't think the unrest, or whatever you want to call it, emptied high-rise commercial buildings in downtown Minneapolis. I think it was the move to not require people to, in order to work, to go to work. And so we had this big thing about frontline workers, the ones who did not have that choice, like police officers, like bus drivers. And we tried to pay particular attention to that because so many people were choosing and encouraged to work remotely. And so I think it's not, we're never going to find a single cause for what comes to be represented in some of these numbers. So I'm going to keep this nearby, and when we get there's some bills, I don't know if we're going to get a chance to hear them all, but there's some bills about changing classification rates, or for the taxing part of it, or giving, there's one that for 10 years gives a property tax exemption for homesteads. I mean, of course, that would be billions, but even the notion that that's something that we should be talking about is, or that someone's coming up with legislation for, is, I find fascinating. We have plenty of time. Go ahead, Senator Weber.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, I think I could probably use up the rest of the time based on everything that's floating around my mind right now. But
sure.
I want to just refer to some earlier comments you made. What we find in the real estate market is that there's a constant change going on. And I'm going to give you an old-timer perspective right now. It'll be 50 years ago next month that I joined my firm that I now own. At that time, ag values in the year previous had just hit $1,000 an acre, and everyone thought the world was coming to an end. And what we saw is in 1986, for example, we saw ag land values that had been at $2,400 an acre in 1984, 85, dropped to $800. Right. I mean, but we also then saw, we got through that period of time, and then when we had the residential downturn back in the early 2000s, from my rural counties, we saw ag values holding up and supporting, and so those percentages continue to shift. At one time, residential will carry a greater load. At another time, ag will. Commercial industrial is always the highest taxed properties, and what have you. And so as I look at your study, Mr. Johnson, and I recognize you're using estimated market values as you prepare your study, And estimated market values come from a mass appraisal standpoint, which is different than what I do in looking at an individual property. But my question for you is, and how does the department utilize these numbers in proposing tax policy? I find them interesting because I'm an appraiser, and probably more interesting than some of the people at the table here do. But that's what I'd like to know. You've obviously put a lot of effort into this, but how does the agency actually utilize these numbers in proposing changes in our property tax policy?
And Mr. Johnson, if it's, you know, a policy question, you might want to bring Ms. Bears up and to answer with you, or if you feel comfortable speaking for the department, go right ahead.
Madam Chair, Senator, yes, thank you. For policy questions, I will certainly turn it over to Joanna. I can answer kind of briefly in the sense of the property tax division. Our goal is uniformity. Certainly there's 87 county assessors, and property tax statutes are extremely complicated, and there's a lot of checks and balances and interactions that we have with assessors kind of to monitor and make sure that the kind of assessments are being administered as uniformly as possible kind of with that, but policy-wise.
Ms. Bears?
Madam Chair, members of the committee, for the record, my name is Joanna Bears. I'm the Legislative Director at the Department of Revenue. And then, Madam Chair, Senator Weber, we use all the information available. I think when we see trends happening or different things happening, our property tax divisions will alert us to different items that may need to be addressed through legislation. But we do use the numbers looking for, you know, different solutions to help with an issue that may be happening.
Senator Weber?
And thank you, Madam Chair. And the other thing I think, and thank you, Mr. Johnson and Ms. Bears for that. The other thing I think we need to remember is on the tax committee is regardless of the policy we set, we're not necessarily responsible for all the costs that have to be absorbed by the real estate tax of the taxpayers of Minnesota. I look at my school districts, for example. I think the report came out, was it the Minneapolis School District has a $50 million shortfall, I heard the other day, is that correct?
Something like that.
Yeah, and all of our school districts are having financial shortfalls. Why did that happen? Quite frankly, the actions of the legislature and the mandates that were placed on them. Our counties are, you know, we look at a lot of the fraud that has occurred within some of the programs that are out there. Our counties are using green screen computers to input application forms. With programs that are so outdated that there's no ability to communicate with different agencies. My people have complained about this for the 13 years I've been here already, and yet I always say it's amazing what we couldn't do with an $18 billion surplus a few years ago. And then with programs that might have had a chance to catch some of that fraud that was going on. And as a result, we saw the governor's proposal for the last budget where the state backed away from certain responsibilities, but our counties still have to provide the services. So what options do our school districts have, or our counties have, or our cities when we put additional mandates on them to raise revenue? It's the property taxes. And so we don't have to even touch it, but because of other actions that we as a legislature take, we manage to produce a large effect on the property taxes in the state of Minnesota. And so, anyway, I just off my soapbox for now. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Anyone else? And I have been forgetting all along to make the comment that Senator Houschild is present remotely. And I should have mentioned that at the beginning in terms of establishing a quorum. Senator Dibble.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Again, you know, we could just say anything we want at the table, that's fine, we all have election certificates, but I wish it would be driven by the facts. Responding to Senator Jaskowski, of course, COVID occurred everywhere. The difference is that Minneapolis has a large central business district, commercial property that is responsible for a great deal of the property value in Minneapolis. And when that drops disproportionate to all the rest of the property in Minneapolis, residential property, that has a disproportionate effect, then every other community around the state.
Residential property taxes go up.
And
because of
residential
it.
property taxes are going up. So that's what's kind of vexing, of
Yes,
course, to
yeah.
residential property taxpayers in Minneapolis, is that while they see values steady or not rising as quickly, or some that go down, the offset, of course, is that, that commercial property value, driven by changing working patterns.
That's what I said.
Yeah, exactly, but, you know, Senator Jaskowski wants it to be about something else, which it's not. It's about that, and just read what the real estate professionals say. And likewise, we can talk about, if we're going to talk about mandates that are driving property taxes, let's talk about what Donald Trump is doing to our counties and to our cities, taking away tens of millions of dollars and adding additional burden and cost and responsibility. That's going to drive up property taxes as well. And we should also, if we're going to be fair, talk about all the ways in which this legislature, led by Democrats, has brought down property taxes and provided a tremendous amount of property tax relief. We heard about the successes in agricultural property, homestead credit, renters credit upfront, you know, LGA investments. The transportation bill actually brings down property tax. We just had a big win a couple days ago about cost sharing that is shared on a bipartisan basis. I'll give Senator Jasinski a lot of credit for that as well. So, Madam Chair, I just, you know, I get to say my piece too. I think my piece is grounded by facts and data and evidence, though. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Sure. Okay, so I think we are going to adjourn now, and we will return to this vigorous conversation over and over, and I hope we learn from one another. And I'm actually not only hoping that, I feel very confident we will. I seldom learn from people I agree with. So thank you very much, everyone, and we are adjourned.